Hersam Acorn newspapers, publishers of the Greenwich Post, New Canaan Advertiser, the Darien Times, the Ridgefield Press, the Weston Forum, the Wilton Bulletin, the Reading Pilot, the Lewisboro Ledger, the Monroe Courier, the Eastern Courier, the Trumbull Times, Fairfield Sun, Shelton Herald, the Stratford Star, the Milford Mirror, and the Valley Gazette.
Hersam, Acorn, and HANradio.com. The leader in local news, sports, arts, and entertainment in southwestern Connecticut.
A little past 2 o'clock, heading up toward 2:03 to be exact, as we get you going on a Monday edition of Nutmeg Sports here on HANradio.com, streaming live on the HAN network. Monday, August 10th it is, and a good afternoon to you. I'm Rob Adams. AJ Simonowski sitting to my right. He'll join us as the hour goes along, and we've got a busy hour for sure. A couple of things we've got to get to from around the world of sports from over the weekend. First of all, we will hopefully talk with Rob Trafone, the head football coach down at Darien High School. The Blue Wave had a big loss in their family over the weekend, losing what they described as their 12th man on the football team. Jim Mulhern was his name, and sadly, coincidentally, ALS took his life over the weekend. Then, of course, Frank Gifford, who we also lost just yesterday, and we want to spend a few minutes on Frank Gifford as well. He was a Greenwich resident, which makes it even more of a local thing for us here on the program. And then right at the top of the show, and I'm really excited about this, we'll have Jonathan Igon, one of the terrific authors and a guy who wrote, and I'm going to say this straight out because I told this to AJ, I said it to Don Eng before the show. It is, for my money, the best sports biography I've ever read, and that is Luckiest Man, the story of Lou Gehrig, which Lou Gehrig is someone I have enormous respect for, and just want to certainly talk to him. Now, I do see a phone line lighting up, which makes me think I'm going to hold on to Jonathan for just an extra moment because I think I know who we have on the line, and I want to make sure, but I know he's tight for time. Coach Trafone, is that you? Let's try that again. Hi, who do we have on the line? Hey, Coach, how are you?
Good. How are you, Rob?
I'm good. Rob Trafone, head football coach down at Darien High School. So we'll put Jonathan Ige on hold for just a moment because I know the coach is very tight on time. And first of all, Coach, my condolences to you and the Darien family over the passing of Mr. Mulhern this weekend.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
I know he meant so much to you and so much to this football team. In your own words, what did he mean?
Well, hard to summarize. I just sent a long, message, if you will, to Steve Bono that, I've never quite encountered a man with so much courage and such a positive outlook on life, and yet faced with such a huge issue as ALS, poses to an individual. So, and, once I introduced him to the team, they all recognize the same exact qualities.
What were those qualities that he brought to this football team? Why did he mean so much to this team?
Well, again, I think all of us are guilty of, taking the small things and turning them into big problems. And, here's a man who's bound to a wheelchair, can barely talk and eat. And yet he had nothing but positive things to say about himself and about life. And, I think the kids would sit there in amazement and just, they couldn't believe, what they were seeing and hearing, from a man who's got, ALS. So I think it taught him a huge lesson about how to prioritize and what's important in life.
I read something that you wrote for the Darien football team. It was posted on. I'm looking at the Tumblr page that it was posted on, and funny story how you first kind of got in touch with him, and one of the times you were talking to him, and he's wearing a Greenwich High School football hat. I thought that was quite humorous. I wondered if you could share that with our audience.
Right. Well, he had lived in Greenwich, for several years, and actually right almost across from the high school. So I'm talking to him, and I knew he was a big, football buff and did follow high school football. And all of a sudden, I noticed, he's got this Greenwich football hat. I said, and I knew him well enough at that point. I said, "Hey, Jim, what gives here?" I said, he goes, "You haven't given me one." I said, "Well, I went right to my car, and of course, I have one. I have one in the trunk of my car. I took it off of his head, the Greenwich hat, and I put the blue. I said, "Never again." And he's laughing, So. And to this day, he's got that hat.
And of course, you had the entire team give him a helmet as well that was autographed. I thought that was a nice touch as well.
Yeah, well, and again, I was torn, if you will, or undecided as to whether or not I should share with him and his wife that, I had ordered this, memorial, this JM. So. And when I spoke to a couple different people, they said absolutely share it with him. So on that last day that we saw him, I did. I shared it with him. So, and he was thrilled to death. That's what we were doing.
And the players are going to wear those stickers on the helmets this year.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful tribute to a really nice man. And I know you guys did the ice bucket challenge for him last year, and I know that meant a lot to not only to him but to you and to the football team as well, didn't it?
It meant a lot. It meant a lot. And as they began to get to know him, I was truly taken back and amazed at how high school teenage boys, who are hard to communicate with sometimes and hard to get an emotion out of, took to him.
Oh, they sure did, and I know the Darien football family's got a little tough heart today. I know everyone's hurting, but we certainly send our condolences. I know you're kind of pressed for time, and that it was not easy for you to come on today, Coach. So I won't keep you, but I am very appreciative of a few minutes, and we'll talk football, and we'll talk about your team and get some happier thoughts as we get a little closer to the season.
Okay, very good.
Thanks, Coach. We appreciate
it. I appreciate it, Rob.
Anytime. Thanks again, Coach.
Okay.
All right.
You take care.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, that is Rob Trifone, head football coach at Darien. And, Steve Buno was nice enough to set that up for me. And he said Coach Trifone was really broken up over the loss of Jim Mulhern, who was really the 12th man to that Darien football team. And I didn't want to stretch his time too far today because I knew that, his emotions are very high. So we do send our condolences out to his wife, Ellen, and the family. And again, it's so strange that we go from that into talking with Jonathan Eig, who, again, I've wanted to talk to for some time about his book, Luckiest Man, regarding Lou Gehrig. And it's a book that came out 10 years ago. But it's so good, and finally looks like it might even get a little bit of a Hollywood touch. We'll bring him in right now. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm great, thanks, Rob.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thanks for those kind words about my book. I really
oh my gosh,
that.
It's just really, and I mean this sincerely. I had read other Lou Gehrig books. I had read the Ray Robinson book. I had seen, of course, Pride of the Yankees hundreds of years ago, and had long been a Gehrig fan, long been fascinated by him. And people had said to me, "You've got to read this book. It is meticulous." And sure enough, it is just. Tell me the process of writing this book, because it is meticulous.
Well, it was about a 4-year effort, and I'm an old-fashioned newspaper reporter. Been working at newspapers since I was 16, and I've always felt like if I had the chance to write a book, I was going to not swing and miss. I was going to give it everything I had. And Gehrig was such an inspiring figure, but he was such a hard guy to research too, because he was shy. He didn't talk much. He didn't write letters. He didn't talk about himself at all. Never wrote his own autobiography. So I had to really dig for every little nugget I could find, and I felt like he was he was hiding from me, and I had to really work hard to find any little scrap of information about him. But it was a joy getting to know him at the same time, because he was truly a great person, I think.
And you mentioned he didn't write a lot of letters, but he wrote a lot of letters to his wife when he, and to the doctors, and there was a lot of that stuff that you published that was just incredible stuff.
I should correct myself, actually. He may have written a lot of letters, but they weren't saved.
Right.
The only ones that I was able to find were toward the end of his life, about 200 pages of letters that he wrote, mostly to his doctor at the Mayo Clinic, and the doctor's replies to Gehrig were all preserved. They were all saved by an autograph collector, and I was the first one really to report on the existence of those letters, and I was able to quote them extensively, and that really gave me a good sense of who this guy was. You spend 3 or 4 years researching a guy's life, and you think you're getting to know him, but until you see his own words, until you see 200 pages of his letters, you don't really know for sure whether you're getting his personality right and whether you've captured the essence of the man, and those letters really opened them up for me.
Certain athletes reach a mythical status. Ruth, obviously, a Michael Jordan, guys like that who, especially Ruth, go off into this stratosphere where you wonder where the myth and reality gets separated. Gehrig seemed to have a mythic status as well, except that there was always this notion that he was this great guy, amazing guy, so humble. And did you break down any of those myths? Was there anything you found that said, okay, maybe he's not perfect, maybe he's not flawless?
Yeah, he was definitely imperfect, like all of us, and in some ways he was, almost pathetic as a man. I kept wanting him to go out and have some fun and meet some girls, and he's on the 1927 Yankees, the greatest team ever,
right?
One of the greatest parties ever. I mean, hanging around with Babe Ruth and during the Jazz age, and Gehrig was so shy, so insecure that he practically never left his hotel room. I really think he had some kind of he may have even had some kind of what we would diagnose today as an anxiety syndrome. Some kind of problem with socializing with people. He was really, it was painful to see. He was also terribly cheap. He wasn't very, until he got married and his wife forced him to come out of his shell a little bit. He didn't like to sign autographs for kids. He would sneak in and out of Yankee Stadium. He was kind of a mess in a lot of ways emotionally. Never really came out from the shadow of his mother, I think. Just a terrible mother's boy. He was definitely not perfect, but he was always true to himself. I think he understood that he was never going to be a social animal. He was never going to be able to party with Babe Ruth, and to try would have, betrayed his sense of self. And I give him a lot of respect for that.
There aren't even a whole lot of interviews available with him. There are a couple. There's a radio interview that I just found from a Minneapolis radio station from when he was at the Mayo Clinic, but there was the stipulation they couldn't ask about his health, so it was basically baseball talk. So he's an interesting guy to try to read up on, and so much of that comes from especially his mother, who is portrayed, certainly in Pride of the Yankees, as this almost overbearing woman, and there's a lot of truth to that, isn't there?
Well, she was overbearing. You'd have to sort of put it in perspective. She lost 3 children. Gehrig was the only one who survived. So I'd probably be a little bit overbearing, too. If I only had 1 child left from 4, I'd be a little overprotective, too. And you also have to bear in mind that movie was really the handiwork of Gehrig's wife, Eleanor.
Right.
And she hated Gehrig's mother. She hated her mother-in-law. So she used that opportunity to make sure that the mother-in-law didn't come off very well in the film, which is, the ultimate revenge of the daughter-in-law who doesn't care for her mother-in-law. But that having been said, whatever Ma Gehrig's faults may have been, she raised an awfully nice young man, and she must have been doing something right.
And Lou's wife, Eleanor, is also a compelling figure. Again, as you mentioned, portrayed by Teresa Wright in Pride of the Yankees in a movie that she helped put together. She's portrayed as this sweet, almost innocent, woman of the 1930s. But in the book, she doesn't come off as sweet and innocent. She comes off a little more, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say a little more controlling, certainly of Gehrig's career. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely, that's fair. I'd maybe even go a little further. She was a wild woman in her day. Before she married Gehrig, she was hanging around with those ball players. She was going to parties. She she was enjoying the jazz age almost as much as people like Babe Ruth were enjoying it. She was drinking and playing poker and smoking and doing things that women weren't supposed to do prior to the Roaring 20s. And when she married Gehrig and settled down finally, she wanted to continue to have that high life. She wanted to go to the theater. She wanted to be seen in public. She wanted to enjoy the celebrity that came with being married to a superstar athlete. And she and Gehrig were very different in that way. And in some ways it was good for Gehrig because she pulled him out of his shell. She forced him to get an agent and think about his image. She encouraged him to go to Hollywood and to audition for movies. And I think that was all really, really good for Gehrig. But Eleanor was a very different kind of a person, and she was not definitely not the all-American sweetheart that you see portrayed in Hollywood.
Pride of the Yankees, though, and I've long known this, it's a very flawed film. It's a Hollywood film for sure. It is a Hollywood biography, but it is not the true reality. And that brings me around to the news that recently came out where hopefully your book is going to make it to Hollywood and get the treatment for Gehrig's life that I think is truly deserved. What can you tell me about that?
Well, it's too early to be sure that anything's going to happen, but we're making progress. I agree with you that I'd love to see Gehrig's story told again, not just because it would bring more attention to my book, but because it would bring more attention to Gehrig, and it would bring more attention to ALS and the fight that is still going on to try to find a cure. I think it would be great for all of those reasons. So we have a new director and producer lined up. We have the Yankees, some members of the Steinbrenner family are backing the film, and they're looking for a writer now. They're looking for a potential star to play Gehrig, and then we'll see if it gets going. You got to get the writer on board, and you got to get some talent on board before the wheels start to move in Hollywood. But I'm optimistic. My fingers are crossed.
Talking with Jonathan Eig, who wrote Luckiest Man, The Life and Death of Lou Gehrig, among other books, that including Get Capone, which is fascinating, and your latest, Birth of the Pill. What can you tell me about that?
Oh, it's a big departure for me. I decided to try something really different, but it's such an exciting story that really surprises a lot of people. It's the story about how the birth control pill was invented, and it's just this crazy group of underdogs with no government support, no university support, no drug company behind them. They decide that they're going to do something to change the world, to make women equals to men, to give the women the power to have sex without having to worry about having children. And they decide that they're going to create a birth control pill when everyone is telling them it's impossible, when it's illegal to do this at the time. So, in some ways I thought of it, when people say to me, well, why did you do something so different? It's not that different. It's a story about underdogs. It's a story about people trying to change the world, and I just fell in love with these characters in the book.
That's fascinating. I mean, I'm sitting here kind of catching up on it, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but that is absolutely fascinating. Who are some of these characters?
Well, it starts with a woman named Margaret Sanger, who is probably the only name people might have heard of. She was a crusader for women's rights and for contraceptive rights going back until like the 19-teens. But in 1950, she's now getting old. She's in her 70s, and she's still going around saying that what we really need is this magic pill that would let people turn on and off their reproductive systems so that women could have babies and start families when they want to. And everybody's been telling her that she's crazy, it'll never happen. And then she meets a scientist named Gregory Pincus, who's been fired from Harvard. He's working out of a garage, and he says, "Oh, I could do that." In part because science has begun to catch up. We understand how the body works now. We understand how hormones regulate the body's functions, and he thinks that he can use hormones to create a birth control pill. So Sanger finds another wealthy woman to give her money to fund this whole thing, and Pincus goes out and finds a Catholic gynecologist who agrees to test this on patients, and these four people really are off to the races with very little support. It's really just the four of them trying to do this by themselves. It's really one of the great American invention stories.
And, of course, it's available Amazon and all the usual outlets that you can get books. I've seen it as well. And I know, given the work that Jonathan has put in on some of these other books, I can only imagine the work you put in on The Birth of the Pill. What about Opening Day? That's another book that I know you wrote, and really the dawn of the civil rights in baseball and I guess civil rights in general. There's a lot to it there.
Yeah, it's the story of Jackie Robinson's first season. And, as a baseball fan, you hear these stories about Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. But when you're a kid, you don't really think about the fact that, he's doing this well before Brown versus Board of Education, before Rosa Parks. When Jackie Robinson comes along in 1947, Martin Luther King Jr. is only 16 years old. He's still in school, So what does it mean for a guy like Robinson to be all alone? That's what I wondered. One black guy in a league of 399 white guys. What was that like? What was it like for his family, for his wife? I really wanted to get beyond the cliches and beyond the mythology and tell the story from the perspective of a guy all alone trying to navigate this unbelievable challenge where so many different things could go wrong, where his experiment could end, and yet he persevered, and I wanted to make that story as human as I could.
2:23 on Nutmeg Sports, speaking with Jonathan Eig on HANradio.com. Let's spin back around to Lou Gehrig and the relationship he had with Babe Ruth. Initially they almost seem like these buddies, and they're always photographed together. And then, of course, they have what is this split in the 30s, and yet there are little moments where you see them. It's a complex relationship. What is the truth behind their relationship?
It is a complex relationship. Growing up, Gehrig idolized Babe Ruth just like all young baseball players did. And when he joined the Yankees, he really admired Ruth and saw him as a mentor. And they traveled together in the off seasons, barnstorming, and got to know each other very well. And Gehrig really saw him as a big brother. Ruth tried to get Gehrig to loosen up, but couldn't quite pull it off, but I think they still had a really nice time together. And then when Gehrig got married, something happened, and I think it was a couple of different factors. One thing is that Gehrig's wife had been kind of a flirt, had been around and knew some of the Yankees. She may have known Ruth from the days when she was single, and I think that's partly why Mrs. Gehrig, Lou's mother, resented Eleanor. And then when Gehrig was a cheapskate, so he didn't take his wife on a real honeymoon. They waited until the year after they were married, and they went to Japan on a barnstorming tour, playing baseball in Asia. And Gehrig brought Eleanor along and called it their honeymoon. And on the ship, on the way over there to Japan, Gehrig couldn't find Eleanor anywhere on the boat and was really frantic, afraid she'd fallen overboard. And then finally found her in the Babe's cabin, drunk, drinking champagne in his bed. And that really upset him, and that ended the friendship with the Babe. And it's funny because if you look at the pictures from their career, every time Babe Ruth hit a home run, Gehrig was standing there at the plate waiting to shake his hand. Gehrig batted fourth after Ruth, who was the third hitter in the lineup. But after that incident, after the trip to Japan that following season, Gehrig would turn his back when Ruth crossed the plate and wouldn't shake his hand. So it was clear something happened there, and Eleanor might have deserved some of the blame. She admitted that she was drunk in the Babe's room. She did not admit that sleeping with him. So we don't really know if anything more than drinking took place. But it was the break in the friendship for Gehrig and Ruth.
And for folks who don't know, the uniform numbers that are so iconic to both Ruth and Gehrig are just a result of where they batted in the lineup in 1929 when the Yankees gave out numbers. And there is a picture that I've seen many times as Ruth is coming home from his called shot in 1932 against the Cubs. There is Gehrig back turned. So I've seen exactly what Jonathan is talking about many times. After that split, that's exactly what he would do. He would turn his back on Babe Ruth. But, of course, come July 4th, 1939, Gehrig makes the speech, and there's Ruth giving him the big hug for, of course, the waiting cameras and a large crowd at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, Ruth never held a grudge. Ruth loved everybody. He just wanted to be loved. He was like a big puppy. So you could kick him, and he'd come back and want to lick you again the next time. And Gehrig seems to have, sort of grudgingly accepted the hug from Ruth at that event. By then he knew he was sick. He knew he was dying, and I guess, bygones were bygones. But and when Gehrig died, Ruth was actually one of the first to get to his house when he heard the news. Middle of the night, he got in his car and drove up there to pay his respects. So I think that there were some bumps in the road, but they overall had a powerful friendship.
When did Gehrig know that as the Gary Cooper awkwardly says, "Doc, is it 3 strikes?" When did he know?
Well, he knew when he went to the Mayo Clinic. He'd been feeling symptoms for about a year and a half before that. He knew something was wrong with his body, couldn't figure out what it was. Tried to play the 1939 season and couldn't do a thing. And after a few games, pulled himself from the lineup and went to the Mayo Clinic. And the doctor there, he'd seen lots of doctors before, but they'd all missed the diagnosis. But the doctor in Minnesota said, I'm sorry to say this, but it's ALS, and explained to him what ALS was, and explained to him that this was a fatal disease. So he knew that from that moment on. And there were moments where he got, he tried to convince himself that he might somehow beat it, that there might be a cure. There was research going on along the way, and just like patients today who are diagnosed with ALS, they hold out hope that something might come along, or that it might turn out to be something other than ALS, because ALS is such a vague disease. It's often difficult to diagnose. So there was still hope that he might discover that this was something other than ALS, but gradually, of course, he accepted it for what it was.
It was obviously one of the sadder things we've ever seen on a ball field, where Gehrig getting his body out there in 1939, getting out for that July 4th ceremony, and of course the words that he spoke to this day. Now, there's a thing about that always drives me nuts, and I can't believe we've never found it. There's some footage, there's some audio, there's some text, but nobody truly has the full version of what he said that day. You have what seems to be the closest to it in the book. What happened? Why do we not have this completely, archived?
It's frustrating, isn't it? It's probably the most famous speech in sports history in this country, and nobody knows exactly what he said. We have 4 sentences that we can be sure of, 4 sentences that exist on tape. And what must have happened is that the newsreels at the time edited it, and nobody thought to preserve the entire film. I'm still hoping that someday someone's going to find it in their attic.
Yeah.
But I've been looking for 10 years, 12 years, and I haven't found it yet. And I pieced together the best I could based on newspaper reports. And I looked for newspaper reports that matched the 4 sentences that we have on film, and used those as my guide to reconstruct the speech as best I could. But nobody knows exactly what he said in the middle. We have the beginning, we have the end. But the middle has so far been lost to history. Very frustrating.
To be fair, after he finishes, with the Yankees in 39, the Yankees weren't exactly great to him in the final days of his life. And I've read that several times, that, he goes off and takes a position with Mayor LaGuardia, but and he's very diligent about it, as you lay out in the book, but it seems like the Yankees, they almost kind of turned their back on him.
Yeah, I think that there was some concern about whether they were going to get stuck having to pay his full salary. They were being cheap about it. They did offer him some kind of an office job, and he didn't want that. He didn't want to be just stuck behind a desk somewhere doing nothing. And I think it was hard for him to hang around the team and not be able to play. So some of it was his own doing, and some of it was the Yankees being cheap. But he was very determined to do something meaningful with whatever time he had left, and that's why he took that job as a parole commissioner for the city of New York, and he worked very hard at it.
Where does he rank in the great players of all time? I always contend he's very high up and a lot higher than people realize.
Yeah, I think you could make a case, and obviously I'm a little biased because he's like family to me, but I think you can make a case that he's the greatest all-around hitter of all time.
I agree.
You put him up there with Ted Williams. You look at the numbers, and Ted Williams missed a couple years for the war, but Gehrig missed probably 5 years, maybe more, with his illness.
Right.
But even if you just look at the numbers as they are, Gehrig's power numbers, his average, his RBI production, just off the charts. I would argue that that he's certainly in the top 5 hitters of all time.
And I would argue he's still up there among the greatest players ever. He's certainly the greatest first baseman ever. What he did throughout his baseball career, and a career that began even before the Yankees, he plays at Columbia and he has success. As a high school kid, he goes to Chicago and has this wonderful game at Wrigley Field. There's just... It's a wonderful career that he has as a ball player, and it's a great life in so many ways, and it's part of why it's so heartbreaking that he's taken so young.
It's true, especially when you see him finally coming into his own. When Ruth retires, he becomes the leader of the Yankees. He really comes out of his shell. He's happily married now. He's going out in public. He's signing autographs. He gets a part in a movie. He's clearly enjoying, the rewards of all of his hard work. And the Yankees are just fantastic, in 38 and 39. It looks like the team is going to have another huge dynasty, and Gehrig is going to be, along with DiMaggio, the heart of this club for another few years. And he's got this streak going. He's played 2,130 consecutive games. He looks unstoppable. And then this horrible disease. The irony of it is terrible, that he's the strongest man in baseball, and he's taken down by this disease that melts your muscles away. It's such a tragedy.
What were your emotions when Cal Ripken broke the record?
It was before I wrote the book, so I wasn't as protective of Gehrig at that time. But I was a Yankee fan, and I grew up, a huge Yankee fan and a huge Gehrig fan. So I hate to see Gehrig lose any of his records. I was especially upset when A-Rod passed him for most career Grand Slams. That struck me as really cruel.
Yeah.
But at least Ripken seems like a great guy, and if anybody was going to break the record, and God knows that's a tough record, to play that many games in a row, you've got to really be not just a strong person, but a person with incredible character to maintain that kind of a streak. So you got to hand it to Ripken.
Absolutely. It worried me that Gehrig would fall into the shadows, which he was known for doing, in his life. The shadow of Ruth, the day he hits 4 home runs, John McGraw, did he die? I've got my stories backwards.
The day McGraw died.
Yeah,
right?
that's
no,
right.
You got it right.
Okay, the day he passed away. Then DiMaggio comes along. It always felt like Lou was in the shadow, and I was afraid that with the Ripken thing, it would kind of take Lou and push him a little further back, but bucket challenge. It's great to see the support coming back around and the attention that is needed for what is iconically known as Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I am a huge supporter of the research and the care that we're raising money for patients with ALS. It's something that I devote a lot of my time and energy to, and Gehrig's. It would be great if we had a cure and people could forget that there's a disease named after Lou Gehrig. I'm really looking forward to that day, but until then, I know Gehrig would be proud that we're using his name to help raise money and raise awareness.
Jonathan, you've been so grateful. I'm going to throw one more question your way, and then I'll let you get going. But there was a report not too long ago that maybe it was concussions, and it wasn't ALS after all that killed Lou Gehrig. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, and even a right or wrong way to ask the question. What did you take out of that?
Well, there's no way to know without an autopsy, and Gehrig was cremated, so that we'll never know the answer to that, and it really doesn't matter. His symptoms were classic ALS symptoms. It would be surprising to me if he had something other than ALS. Of course, it's possible, but the important thing is that he believed he had ALS. He was treated as if he had ALS. He died in a way that suggests he had ALS, and his name today provides strength and courage for people with ALS, and that's the bottom line.
You have been very gracious to give me this time on a book that has meant so much to me, quite honestly, and I really hope this moves toward getting a movie made, and you're welcome on this program anytime, Jonathan. I'm truly grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun talking to you, and I appreciate your support.
Anytime, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, Rob. Thanks. Take care.
All right, you too. That is Jonathan Eig, the author of many books, including his latest is The Birth of the Pill, Opening Day, Get Capone, and, of course, the book that did it for me. Just a truly incredible book. Luckiest Man, the life and death of this guy, Lou Gehrig.
Let's imagine, if you will, the hearts of these New Yorkers here in this World Series having to take their choice between Gehrig and the Giants. The pitch, it's a ball. Strike two and ball two. 2-2. Not uncommon for them to be unable to make up their minds to take a choice of their favorite in this series. Both teams from New York. Strike two and ball two. This is getting his signal. Starts his windup, 2-2, coming. There's a long drive, it's foul. Roar from the crowd. Gehrig got a hold of that one and drove it high up in the upper stands, out there in foul territory in right field. And the count is strike two, ball two. Gehrig leading off, first man up in the last half of the second inning. Nobody has scored as yet. Here's the windup, 2-2. There it goes, a long smash deep in the center field. Way up, going. A home run! A home run! Lou Gehrig with that count, ball two and strike two. Listen to that crowd.
For the past 2 weeks, but I've got an awful lot to live for. Thanks.
Breaks, sprains, injuries, and pain can now be quickly and expertly treated at Coastal Ortho Express in Norwalk. Why wait hours in the ER? Save a trip and save money going straight to an orthopedic specialist at Coastal Ortho Express Urgent Care, 203-845-2070. No appointment necessary. Coastal Ortho Express Urgent Care, open Monday through Saturday in the iPark building at 761 Main Avenue in Norwalk, or call 203-845-2070. Fast!
Healthy, confident smiles begin at Stratford Orthodontics. Conveniently located on Main Street, we are Stratford's hometown orthodontist. We offer the latest in orthodontic technology, including Damon braces and Invisalign. We always accept new patients. Call today to schedule a complimentary consultation. 203-375-8332. Stratford Orthodontics, 2499 Main Street, Stratford. 203-375-8332, and online at stratfordsmile.com.
Alliance. We are an industry leader in coordinating transportation for large events such as corporate roadshows, conferences, and special events. Our team of experts understands the dynamics and logistics of high-pressure situations and complex arrangements, all within a rapidly changing environment. Since 1999, we have added charter jets, event management, and personal protection to our range of services. Mention this ad for $25 off your next round-trip reservation. Alliance and you. Together, we can achieve the extraordinary. 855-546-6996 or alliancelimo.com.
August means tennis in Connecticut, and the top players are going to be here. Be there as some of the world's best women compete for the title at the Connecticut Open presented by United Technologies. And the boys are back for the Men's Legends event presented by PowerShares Series with John McEnroe, James Blake, and more. Experience a variety of food trucks, hands-on activities, live music, and so much more for the kids and family. It all adds up to one legendary week. August 21st through the 29th at the Connecticut Tennis Center in New Haven. Get your tickets at ctopen.org.
You're listening to Hersam Acorn Radio.
Well, you're listening to the HAN Network, that's for sure, as we're back with you on Nutmeg Sports at 2:41. I'm Rob Adams. AJ Simonowski sitting to my right. He's going to pop on for a little bit as well. And I've had a couple of people check in with me following the interview with Jonathan Eig just now. And for me, there are certain things that are in my wheelhouse, and that interview was one of them. I could have spent at least the balance of the hour talking with him, not only about his other books. I mean, the Opening Day book about 1947 and the appearance of Jackie Robinson, but Gehrig himself is a much more compelling figure than I think anyone has ever realized.
Truly, like you said, mythical in a way. He's gone because of his play on the field and and having ALS and what he's come to symbolize in that venture, he's beyond. He's beyond a mere athlete. He's beyond a guy in a uniform hitting a ball around.
Yeah, and he's not a guy, I don't care what anyone, if anyone tries to say this, they're nuts. Simply because you're the guy that's hitting behind Babe Ruth up until 1934, it helps, but you got to be a hell of a hitter to do what Gehrig was doing.
Absolutely, because you're hitting behind Ruth, so there's no one on ahead of you.
Right.
Ever, basically.
Basically true. You can say he was protection for Ruth, but Ruth was Ruth. I mean, Ruth was the greatest ever. Gehrig, I agree with Jonathan. There's a case that can be made that he might be the best all-around hitter, and he is, to me, in that top. I still think he's a top 5 ball player. He's right there.
I can't say that I would go as far as to make him the best hitter, the number 1 hitter.
Oh, he's right there, though.
He's right. He's absolutely right there.
Yep.
I don't know that I would go as far as the top. If he's not the top, he's 2 or 3.
Jonathan put him top 5 hitter. I don't see where that's a bad move.
No, I don't disagree with it at all.
I mean, I'll spare you too many numbers, folks, but there are, if OPS is what rocks your boat, let's start there. We've got, there's 3, there's 6, there's 8, 11. 11 years from what I can see, and I believe that is true, from 1927 to 1937, so 11 seasons, over 1.0 OPS, if that's your thing.
That's insane. That's truly insane.
He has a 1.174 in 1936. And then what that means is his on-base was 478 and his slugging was 696. Oh, by the way, in 1934, when he wins the American League Most Valuable Player, or one of the MVP awards, because they gave out many back then, his true MVP award, he won 2 of them. One in 36 and one in 27. And he won it in 27 because at that time you could only win what they called the Chalmers Award once. Ruth had already won it, so they gave it to Gehrig in 27. But in 34, he has a 1.172 OPS with a 706 slugging, 49 homers and 166 runs batted in, and he hit 363. I mean, he won a Triple Crown, by the way.
How could he not?
These are EA Sports numbers.
And we may be looking at the same info, Rob, but I also see 210 hits.
Yeah.
In 154 games.
In 154 games, yep. And that's not even his career high. He had 220 in 1930. 220 hits in 1930. 218 in 1927. I mean, these are just crazy numbers. Even in his last full year, 1938, he hits 295, which was a big drop-off for Lou. 295, 29 homers, 114 runs batted in, but still 170 hits in 157 games. But it's obvious by the first 8 games of 1939 that things are wrong. And I look, there are more things we could have asked him, including about the streak itself. There were things he had to be lucky about. Some of them being because I know there was a time he got beaned, but he was able to play just enough, and then the next day he got out there and he found a way to make an appearance. Did he find ways to stretch the streak? Yeah, I think he did. It became his thing.
Any of the great streaks have moments like that. Cal did it. I think of Brett Favre.
Sure.
There are plenty of games that he didn't finish or only played the first quarter in a blowout.
Cal got lucky in that a couple of his kids were either born on off days or in the off season. Gehrig found his ways to get back into the lineup. Their streaks get stretched, and there's no doubt, and I've said this before, there were times that Cal should have sat down. There's absolutely no question in my mind. But he did it. He made it. It's, again, mythical, and you let it go. It did always worry me that Gehrig was going to get pushed to the background when the streak was snapped or broken in 1995. But if anything, it's kind of raised his status. So
I almost jumped in when you brought that up with Jonathan, but I didn't want to mess with your mojo there. The proof that Lou would not just fade into the background is that moment is not looked upon as Cal Ripken setting the consecutive games record.
Right.
It's still referenced as breaking Lou Gehrig's record.
It is.
It's still really considered his record.
It is. And
with like you said, no disrespect to Cal Ripken.
No. And Cal Ripken is, there are different versions of Cal Ripken's story, but I think there's enough for my money to indicate that people highly regard him and that he's a pretty good guy. I've never spoken to him, so I can't say that for sure. But he's certainly beloved in the entire state of Maryland. Absolutely adores Cal Ripken, and his facility down in Aberdeen, Maryland is just beautiful. So I think that is a good representation of what Lou Gehrig, what he stood for.
I can't argue it with you.
Yeah. Yep. 2:48 here on Nutmeg Sports. Again, I could spend the whole hour just doing Lou Gehrig commentary. And, again, thanks to Rob Trefone, who was very gracious to join us at the beginning of the hour. I know with some heavy heart, but he came on and talked about Jim Mulhern. Hopefully we have not, depressed you during this show because, the passing of Jim Mulhern, the time we spent on Lou Gehrig, and now, of course, the time we're going to spend on Frank Gifford. There have certainly been some heavy hearts throughout our region over the past 48 hours or so. Frank Gifford did live in Greenwich, was a very nice man. I had the opportunity to interview him in 2001, just after September 11th. He was absolutely wonderful to talk to. As I said on Coffee Break this morning, you didn't ask Frank Gifford about the 1958 NFL championship, and yet that was my first question to him. The funny thing is, I drove to do the interview that night, and I thought to myself, well, what do I want to start with? He's had such a career. He's been a broadcaster. There was a certain Madison Avenue to him. He was a very bankable star in that regard. Had done more than just Monday Night Football, and we can play it for you again, his call of Franz Klammer's gold medal in 1976. In certain aspects, he was an icon. And for me as a kid in the 70s, he was not a New York Giant. I didn't know that until a little bit later on when I found out, oh, by the way, he was a heck of a football player, as was his buddy on Monday Night Football, Dandy Don Meredith, was a very good NFL player for the Cowboys and was the losing quarterback, in fact, in the Ice Bowl. We always talk about the Ice Bowl and the Packers, and AJ will no doubt wave the Packer banner on that one, and for good reason. But Lombardi, Starr, and the Packers had to come back and beat Don Meredith and the Cowboys, who had the lead that day, 17-14. So, but Gifford was he was a solid play-by-play man, if not unspectacular, but he was very solid. He was a voice of youth for a lot of us. He was the kind of stabilizing force in the ABC booth between two wild cards in Don Meredith, who put on a heck of a show on the air and was much more laid back off the air, and, of course, Howard Cosell. And Howard Cosell was exactly on the air and off the air. The only difference was he didn't curse at you on the air. Gifford was that guy who kind of played it right down the middle. He was the football guy for sure. As I said, Meredith, of course, also played, but a solid play-by-play guy. If, like I said, maybe not spectacular. I'd rather be thinking of Frank Gifford today as the guy that I met and interviewed in Greenwich, as the guy that in the old Greenwich Civic Center at the Greenwich football banquet would just be Frank, standing on line for the buffet, just as I was. Just a regular guy who, by the way, was an NFL Hall of Famer, by the way, still holds the Giants' touchdown career record. Oh, he happened to be the lead voice on Monday Night Football and did a whole lot with Wide World of Sports and did a whole lot of stuff in his 84 years. But he was just Frank Gifford on that line. Call him Frank. That's who he was. He was just Cody Gifford's dad, and Cody Gifford was a fine receiver at Greenwich High School. Among my other memories of Mr. Gifford, going to Florida in 2007 to call the Greenwich-Naples football game, which was a big deal at the time, and I had the honor of going down and being the broadcaster. In fact, the Florida radio station that did the game that night didn't have an online presence, which still is shocking to me. We were the only ones who did it to the entire world, and I always kind of hold that close to my heart. But the big deal was that Frank Gifford and Kathy Lee Gifford were going to that game, and the next day, on the cover of one of the sections of the paper, was Kathy Lee Gifford holding a baby. Apparently, she didn't go to the number of games due to schedule or whatever that Frank went to. Frank was always there. You could spot Frank in the crowd. You could see Frank, as I said, at the banquet. He was a very nice man, and as I said, a fine broadcaster, and I've got a couple of pieces of audio for you that kind of stand out to me. The first one that I mentioned is the Franz Klammer gold medal run. This is in Innsbruck in 1976. He's working that day on ABC with Bob Beatty, and you hear a lot of Beatty early on, but Frank's work in this call is pretty darn good. I saw one note this morning that described it as iconic, and if you grew up with the Olympics, with Wide World of Sports, you heard this call quite a bit. This is Frank Gifford, Bob Beatty, 1976. On ABC, of course, the Olympics.
15, the greatest downhiller, many people say, of all time. Well, Frankie knows what he has to do because most of the tough competition has already gone ahead of him. He's the last man in the first seeding group of 15. He knows Brucey is in first place. He knows what he has to do. You can be sure with all the pressure that's riding on his shoulders that he had trouble right there. Trouble by Klammer right on the top. Trouble again, Frank. He's right on the edge.
And he's right on the edge, and there's that intermediate time, and he's just 200ths of a second behind Rusi.
And even with those mistakes, Franz Klammer, though, has a tendency to really come on strong at the bottom of half of downhill. But the pressure on him is tremendous. Bernard Rusi sitting at the bottom of first place. Klammer almost went down, Frank.
Roger said he's on the edge. Believe me, he is on the edge of disaster. And he knows what he has to do. Look at him fly.
Well, remember one thing. He's carrying a lot of speed down that mountain. We saw him almost go into the nets, but he's still going.
His intermediate time now will appear on the right. Rusi's will be on the left as we pick up that second intermediate time. The Austrian fans at the bottom of the hill are going crazy.
And Franz Klammer certainly cannot be accused of doing anything but attacking. Look at him go for it.
And he's still 100ths of a second behind Rusi. He has got to let it go.
He's all over this mountain. 2 tenths he has to make up on the lower part of the mountain. Franz Klammer is really going to have to move if he's going to catch Rusi. He's almost out of the hay bales.
And into the bare turn. He'll go over the Hummus Pass, and then he'll head for home. You'll see Rusi's time come up on the left, Klammer's on the right.
He's going to have to do it right down here at the bottom, Frank. Here he comes a lot more air.
This is it. This is for the gold medal.
Franz Klammer is really going to have to pull it out. Look at him get in that cut.
Rusi's time on the left, Klammer on the right. Klammer has done it. This crowd has gone crazy. Franz Klammer has overtaken Bernard Rusi. An incredible race.
So there you go. Innsbruck 1976, Franz Klammer winning the gold medal on ABC. And then this other piece is just a fascinating exchange from December 8th, 1980. Now, that date means something to a lot of people. It means a lot to fans of a band called the Beatles. It means a lot to New Yorkers. It meant a little something to the Patriots and the Dolphins. This is off-the-air conversation between Gifford and Cosell as they get the word of some breaking news.
Fellas, I just don't know. I'd like your opinion. I can't see this game situation allowing for that news flash. Can you?
Absolutely, I can see it.
You can?
You betcha. We've got to. If we know it, we've got to do it.
All right.
I don't hang on it. It's a tragic moment. And
all right.
This is going to shake up the whole world.
All right. I will get it in. Let Gift call this play, and then I'll get it in.
It was just.
And there you go. Just a remarkable piece of audio from off the air as Monday Night Football decides what they're going to do with the announcement of the passing of John Lennon.
As sad a moment as it is, I find a bit of sick humor in it that Cosell is wondering, is this worth interrupting this game for?
It's amazing to me, and Cosell had interviewed Lennon a few years earlier on Monday Night Football, first football game that Lennon had ever been to, and they kind of struck up John Lennon had some awkward friendships later in his, not awkward, but unique friendships later in his life. He was known to just kind of pop into rock and roll radio stations and say, hey, I'm here, want to talk for a little bit? He could be like that. And this was one of his unique friendships, was with Cosell, of all people. Cosell almost got the Beatles back together.
Then again, he was John Lennon. What are you going to do? Tell him no?
Yeah, exactly. And so here is this situation with a game-winning a game-tying field goal on the line, and wow, interesting stuff. And then you go on and here, of course, it's Gifford who says on the air, we have this news, and Howard, you have to go on and announce it. Very, very interesting stuff. And of course, the passing of Frank Gifford today, over the weekend. So we lost a good one for sure, and of course in Darien they lost someone that they loved as well. And our condolences go out to the Darien football family on the passing of Mr. Mulhern. And quite a show we've had here over the past 58 minutes. Certain shows, I don't know. Right before this one got on the air, I was ready to rock with this one. Jonathan Eig was something I'd been looking forward to that interview.
And it was a good enough. He was gracious enough to come on and talk about the book, and it made it interesting enough that I might just go and pick it up.
Yeah, it's 10 years old, and it's fantastic. It is fantastic.
If you're gonna read about Gehrig, find the definitive. It seems pretty definitive to me.
I thought the Ray Robinson book that I read back in 1990, I thought that was going to be the end-all, be-all for me. And so it initially, I had people tell me, if you like the Robinson book, you're going to love the Eig book. And, oh, yeah. It's long, it's detailed, it's meticulous. But even early on, when you're learning his life in Washington Heights and kind of Harlem and that, New York turn of the century, early 1900s, and the learning about the loss of all the Gehrig children. As Jonathan said, Lou is the only one that survives.
Something of which I was not aware.
Yeah.
Would certainly point to why his mother may have been a little overbearing.
Yeah, and you find out that there's a lot of the myths stand up. Where with Ruth you wonder what's myth, what's reality. With Gehrig, it pretty much lives up to exactly what he was.
I never wondered. As I've said, I know not as much about the classics, but
I suppose to a certain extent you could say he was too good to be true, but no, he was pretty much the real deal.
I buy it.
Pretty much the real deal. So our thanks to Jonathan Eig, our thanks to Rob Trifone, my thanks to AJ Simonowski. Always happy to have him keep me company here, and we will do it again tomorrow. I so want to tell you that I've got a guest lined up for tomorrow, simply because I know who the guest is supposed to be, and I can't confirm it. Gosh, so close. So as soon as I get the confirmation, you will all know it because I will tweet it out in bold letters. You know who it is too, and I do.
I know who he's talking about.
Can't talk about it.
Can't say.
Nope. And another guest just as big, if not bigger, possibly later in the month. Just not while I'm on vacation next week. All right, AJ, thanks so much to you, and thanks so much to all of you for listening and watching. We will be back with you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Again, thanks to Jonathan Eig. Thanks to Rob Trifone for coming on under very tough circumstances. For all of us here at HANradio.com, along the HAN Network, I'm Rob Adams. We will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching and listening to Nutmeg Sports. Back with you tomorrow at 2, coffee break, a half hour now. 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Have a great night, everyone. So long.
Yabba dabba dabba, yabba dabba dabba, yabba dabba 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 doo. Yabba dabba 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 doo.
Hersam, Acorn, and HANradio.com. The leader in local news, sports, arts, and entertainment in southwestern Connecticut.
Want to get in touch with HAN Radio? You can find us on Twitter at Hersam Radio, on Facebook at Hersam Acorn Radio, or email us at radio@hersamacorn.com.